Hey everyone, in this video I'd like to read through and explain the prompt for major essay project number 1. The ancient philosopher Aristotle defines rhetoric as the art of persuasion. Throughout our course, we will continue to explore the various rhetorical strategies people employ to persuade audiences, and we will cultivate our own abilities to evaluate the effectiveness of arguments. Therefore, our first essay project of the course is a rhetorical analysis. You will choose one of the TED Talks provided below and write an essay in which you analyze the speaker's argument and then assess how effective the speaker's presentation is based on your analysis. As Andrea Lunsford and John Ruskovich explain in their book, Everything's an Argument, we perform a rhetorical analysis by analyzing how well the components of an argument work together to persuade or move an audience. With this in mind, note that you are not arguing whether or not you agree with the speaker. Rather, you are analyzing the speaker's presentation of their argument, and based on that analysis, arguing how effective or ineffective the speaker's presentation is. So I want to pause for a second here and emphasize this and explain it a little bit more. So this is really important to keep in mind. We're not challenged to write an argument that expresses our point of view about what the speaker is talking about. So in other words, we're not trying to explain why we agree or disagree with that person's argument, right? Instead, what we're doing is we're analyzing the way that the speaker has presented that argument. And based on that analysis, based on the breakdown of that, then coming to some kind of conclusion about whether or not we think the argument is effective. Meaning, do we think that they did a good job getting the argument across? Whether or not we agree with what they're saying is irrelevant, actually. So you could totally disagree with what the person is saying, but still think that they did a really good job of getting that argument across. And vice versa. You could agree with what the speaker is saying, think that their argument, the content of their argument is, really a good argument, a good opinion, you agree with it, but you could think that they didn't do a good job getting it across. And so what your job is to explain how they got that argument across, right? So let's continue here. This project challenges us to think and act rhetorically, to consider an argument's context, audience, and purpose before drawing conclusions. To do this successfully, you will identify the speaker's thesis and discuss how the various rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos, among other elements and rhetorical strategies we've been learning about in Everything's an Argument, contribute to the rhetorical situation and affects their presentation. Rather than trying to analyze the speaker's presentation as a whole, focus on a representative moment or key section in the TED Talk that demonstrates the main reason the presentation is effective or ineffective, no more than a couple of minutes in length. Do not analyze the rhetorical devices as separate, distinct elements. Instead, show how the 4 rhetorical devices work together in a single moment of the text. Additionally, do not organize your essay by separating it into 4 sections, one for each of the rhetorical devices. To avoid the listing effect, we want to treat our points as a unified progression of ideas. Review rhetorical analysis on pages 97 through 117 in Everything's an Argument for more information on how to conduct an effective rhetorical analysis. So let me clarify this here. I know the tendency might be to, so once we select our TED Talk, the tendency is just to then go through the TED Talk in chronological order. So starting at the very beginning of the TED Talk and just kind of making our way through and explaining what we think the speaker did well or didn't do well throughout the entire TED Talk. So just going through a chronological order. That's going to make for a really, really boring essay though. And so one of our goals in this class is to become more engaging and sophisticated writers. And so we want to try new methods of organization and new approaches. So instead of just going through the entire TED Talk, so just, like I said, going through chronologically from start to finish and just pointing out all the things we think the speaker did well or didn't do well, focus on one main area in the TED Talk. So one section of the TED Talk that you think is a really good example of what you think the speaker does really well overall. So instead, you're just going to focus on that one main aspect of the speech rather than talking about everything in the speech, if that makes sense. So only that one main aspect. So try to limit it to only a couple of minutes in length that you're focusing on in the TED Talk versus the entire 12 or 15 minutes or however long the TED Talk happens to be, because each one is different length. But so focus on one main key example that you think is a really good representation of what the speaker does really well, or maybe doesn't do well throughout the whole speech, if that makes sense. Although you are not required to do outside research for this essay, you may choose to investigate who the speaker is in order to help you analyze their presentation. For example, if the speaker has written a best-selling book about the topic they're presenting, it may influence whether or not their argument is credible. So I encourage you all to do a Google search of the TED speaker that you select, just so you can get a little bit of context and background about who that person is, especially if it's somebody that you've never heard of before, which might be the case. But you don't need to bring in a multitude of outside texts to try to help you with your analysis here. Really, the only text you need is just the TED Talk that you're analyzing. But I do encourage you just to explore who the speaker is a little bit. In this essay project, we are challenged to have a title that conveys the purpose of your essay. So in other words, your essays or your paper's thesis, so what the main argument is. So your title should hint to that. And it should follow what we call the title::subtitle pattern. And that's something that I will explain in the coming weeks as we continue to work on this essay. We're challenged to have an introduction that provides a brief but detailed summary of the TED Talk you're analyzing. What's the speaker's main point? How does the speaker support this main point? Why is this argument significant? So that's what your introduction should be, just jumping right into providing a brief but detailed summary of the TED Talk so that your reader, if they've never seen the TED Talk, right from the beginning you're giving a nice little summary so that the reader can then go along with the rest of your paper. So that's how you should begin your essay, providing a brief but detailed summary of the TED Talk. We're challenged to have a clear thesis that addresses the prompt as well as asserts your argument without simply listing out your supporting reasons. Strive for a two-part thesis with an overarching umbrella reason. So this is something else I will also explain in the coming weeks. So we're going to move beyond the thesis pattern that we learned so well when we were writing 5-paragraph essays, but we're moving beyond that essay structure. So we want to also have a more sophisticated thesis statements. So we'll go through and talk about what a two-part thesis is. We're challenged to write an essay with a coherent and purposeful structure and organization that resists the limiting nature of the 5-paragraph essay. So in other words, do not follow that 5-paragraph essay pattern where you have your introduction that has your thesis, where you list out your 3 main reasons, and then for each of your 3 body paragraphs, you focus on one of those reasons, and then for your conclusion, you summarize what you just talked about. No, we're moving beyond that. We're much more sophisticated than the 5-paragraph essay structure, so we want to resist that limiting nature and kind of bust out of that mold. And so I built in a mechanism to kind of force us to move beyond 5 paragraphs. So we need to have at least 7 well-developed and supported paragraphs. You can have more than 7, but you can't have fewer than 7. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that's a mechanism to bust us out of that 5-paragraph essay structure. We're challenged to avoid the listing effect. In other words, we want to treat our points as a unified progression of ideas rather than just disconnected items in a list. So one of the carryovers of the 5-paragraph essay was creating this kind of listing effect where you say point A, all right, and then you talk all about point A. Moving on, point B. Moving on, point C. again, we're moving into more sophisticated writing styles, so we want to avoid that listing effect where we're just treating our points as just separate items, disconnected items in a list. Everything should be connected, so one point should lead into the one that follows. Everything should be a unified progression of ideas. We're challenged to include purposeful and well-integrated quotations from your primary text, and your primary text is your TED Talk. So I'm not going to prescribe how many, like a specific number of quotations that you need, but you definitely need several quotations from the TED Talk to help demonstrate what you're trying to get across to your reader, right? So we want to include specific details from the TED Talk, and those specific details in many cases will come in the form of quotations that you'll include. We're challenged to have a discussion of the different rhetorical appeals without using the words ethos, pathos, logos, or kairos. So this is definitely going to be a challenge, but it's one that I know that you're all up for and capable of overcoming. But the reason we want to talk about ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos without actually using those words is because I want to make sure that you all understand the concepts. And so if we're just relying on the words, we might say, oh, the speaker uses ethos here, oh, there's pathos here, oh, there's kairos there, without actually understanding what those words refer to, what they actually mean, right? So in other words, you would say something like, the speaker builds credibility by, or when they, right? So that's a way to get around that. The speaker elicits an emotional response, so we want to talk about what the concepts are without using their names. So definitely a challenge, but it'll be a fun one. We're challenged to have a conclusion that does not simply summarize your paper. An effective conclusion often answers the so what question. What's the bigger picture? Why is this important? Why should we care? Why might these ideas affect the future? Or how might these ideas affect the future? So that's what an effective conclusion will do. It'll address the so what question. And these questions here are all a part of that, addressing it, explaining what the significance of these ideas are. So this is where you can kind of touch on the content of the speaker's presentation. So why is it important that they are successful in getting this message across? Why is the message itself important? So that's where you address that in the conclusion. We're challenged to write a rhetorical analysis of at least 4 full pages in length. So that's top to bottom, okay? So not just kind of, 2/3 the way down the page, top to bottom, 4 full pages. So that's approximately 1,200 words, but might be a little bit more. Double-spaced 12-point Times New Roman font, MLA format, and that includes a properly formatted works cited page. Because you'll be quoting from your TED Talk, you need to cite your TED Talk on the works cited page. Now the 4 pages do not include the cover letter or the works cited page. Okay, so that's not a part of the page count. So just keep that in mind. And then we're challenged to show ownership and pride over our work, taking care to eliminate major or distracting spelling, grammatical, and typographical errors. So we want to make sure that we are submitting something that we're proud of, and we've demonstrated the hard work we put into the project by taking care of how it's presented, right? So making sure that we've eliminated as best as we can major distracting spelling, grammatical, and typographical errors, but just really showing your readers that you took care in creating this piece of work. Because whether we like this reality or not, the writing that we put into the world, or really the work that we put into the world, whatever that is a representation of us as who we are as people, and people judge us based on that work, right? So we want to make sure that this is going to be a good representation of all the work that we put into it. All right, so here is the list of all of the TED Talks that you can select. So we have how many? About 10 TED Talks here. So these are all links, so you can click on them. So Ron Finley, he's an urban gardener and an artist, and so his TED Talk focuses on what he calls guerrilla gardening. Majora Carter, she talks about a similar topic, greening the ghetto, why it's so important to have green spaces in urban environments, how it's really important for the health of the community. Sal Khan, Let's Teach for Mastery, Not Test Scores. So Sal Khan, he's the one who created the Khan Academy, which many of you are probably familiar with. There's all sorts of videos on YouTube that explain a lot of different concepts, most notably a lot of math concepts. But Sal Khan, he's the one responsible for that. So he talks about education, why it's important that we teach for mastery and not so much about test scores. Trevor Reagan, How to Overcome Fear. He's really big in the growth mindset kind of world. So he talks a lot about the growth mindset and how it's important that we use fear in a productive way to help us surmount challenges that we might face. Roxane Gay, in her TED Talk Confessions of a Bad Feminist, she has a book called Bad Feminist, and she identifies as what she calls a bad feminist. But what exactly does that mean? What does she mean by that? Adam Grant, The Surprising Habits of Original Thinkers, he talks about the importance of having time for ideas to be able to develop if we're going to be original in our thinking. Zachary Wood, Why It's Worth Listening to People You Disagree With. So this is an important message, especially in these times when we know that the country is so divided politically, left and right. Nobody's talking to one another. We're all just stuck in our little worlds and remaining increasingly divided. But Zachary Wood, he talks about why it's important that we are reaching across the aisles and listening to people with whom we disagree. Greta Thunberg, many of you probably will know her as a Swedish climate activist, and she's really young. She's been doing a school climate strike every Friday for the past few years, and so her TED Talk is about the importance of acting on climate change now. Kate Raworth, A Healthy Economy Should Be Designed to Thrive, Not Grow. So any of you who are looking to go into business or economics might want to check this out. She has a really interesting way of thinking about the economy that it goes against kind of the standard wisdom of what an economy should be, what a healthy economy should do or be. All right, so those are the TED Talks that you can choose. What I recommend that you do is kind of cruise through them a little bit. You can just kind of skim them, so fast forward a little bit and see. If it's one that you don't really like, it seems not really interesting to you, then don't choose it. Choose one that seems really interesting to you. But I tried to get a wide range of different topics. So due dates. I'm making this video for several classes, so you're going to want to refer to your specific prompt for the due dates. Please note, in order for Major Essay Project 1 to be considered complete, you must submit all of the components. Each draft must be submitted in order for the project to be considered complete, so just keep that in mind. And then I have a whole list of important and relevant quotations from Rhetorical Analysis, Chapter 6, and Everything's an Argument, pages 97 through 117. So you can cruise through these quotations and see. This should give you some ideas of what to try to accomplish in your analysis. All right, well, if you have any questions, just let me know. Send me a message on Canvas. I'll be happy to talk about it with anybody. So I'm looking forward to reading these essays. Take care, y'all.